had to really figure out, how do you change everything about yourself that's worked for you, that's protected you for so long? And that took me a long time to get to. But even when working in tech, there are very few women in the spaces that I was working in. And so again, like, you feel like that safety is in keeping your head down, when actually having influence means speaking up.
Welcome to Unbehaved. I'm Megan French Dunbar, and you just heard from the extraordinary Deb Liu. Deb's the former CEO of Ancestry, previously known as Ancestry.com, and she also sits on the board of Intuit. Before that, she made waves in the tech industry, leading the PayPal eBay product integration, and as VP of Product and Marketplace at Facebook, creating, yes, I said creating, Facebook Marketplace. Now, I don't know about you, but when I hear all of Deb's impressive titles, it kind of makes me sit up on my chair a bit. Am I right? When I met her last year at TEDx San Diego, where both of us were speakers, I admit I felt a little intimidated by her after I learned about her background. Like she wasn't quite on my level, or like I'd need to treat her differently or something. So imagine my surprise when not only did I realize that Deb is incredibly kind and down to earth, but during her talk called Let's Make It Awkward, she openly talked about how often people in the tech world completely ignored her. Even as the damn CEO of a multi-billion-dollar company, people would direct their questions and their attention to everyone else in the room but her. Finally, fed up with this situation, she and a group of other women decided they'd had enough. They were going to start speaking up. They were going to start making things awkward. And that's what we're going to talk about today. What it looks like to stop prioritizing others' comfort over your own. Why speaking up matters for people who aren't even in the room. What happened when Deb spoke up publicly about her breast cancer diagnosis. And how anyone can learn how to own a room regardless of what you tell yourself about your personality. I also want to name that this conversation happens against the backdrop of an enormous past year and a half for Deb, one that included losing her mother, her in-laws, a breast cancer diagnosis, and stepping down from Ancestry. What she brings to this particular episode is an incredibly honest, generous, and clear-eyed take on what it looks like to keep evolving as a leader and as a human. Let's get into it. All right, Deb. So you and I met in September when our TEDx San Diego, we were in the same cohort, and you gave an incredible talk that I still think about to this day about owning your awkward, and let's make it awkward. And we're going to get into that. But the thing that I want to start with is the origin story of growing up in the South and the ways in which you learned how to be safe and to protect yourself by staying small. Can you start us there and just help us understand where the story came from?
Yeah, I was born in New York City, and my parents were immigrants. They had come to the US for college. They met in the US. And, we lived in Queens. And then inexplicably, when I was 6 years old, my parents decided to move to South Carolina. I later found out that it was because my dad was being discriminated against at work, and his friend and colleague had moved south and worked for the government and said, I can get you a job at the US government. It turns out that they were the only Indian family and were the only Chinese family in the town that we ended up moving to. Which you can only imagine what the shock is when you grow up in a place like that. And so, it was just being so different. Like everybody, I realized I kept playing small because I was like, if people just didn't see me, maybe they'll stop making comments. Like people would walk up to my parents in the street at the mall and say, go back to where you came from. It's like it's a very different place. And at the time it was like maybe 0.5% Asian, maybe less than 1% Asian at the time. And we were like aliens that landed on a different planet to them. And I just remember feeling like I need to just hide and no one would comment. And so I made myself smaller and smaller and quieter over the years. And I just play along. It's going to be okay.
And was that behavior that you just picked up, or was that what you were told to do by your parents?
So my parents were like, just ignore them. They're just ignorant. They lived an American dream that was really hard for me to reconcile because they're like, we own a big house. We lived in the middle of nowhere. So, we lived in this house and, we had this big yard. And so for them, it was just, they came from Hong Kong where it was very crowded, right? And so for them, they lived the American dream. And the price of the American dream was just not belonging. And that's okay. And I really struggle with that because I'm like, I was born in America, I'm
Hmm.
just as American as any of these kids. Why am I seen as a foreigner? And it's like the forever outsider, the forever foreigner was like such a piece of who I was growing up. And it was so hard for me to reconcile that. And so they just said, ignore them, just don't pay attention. And so I tried to do that. Right. But, it's not like people are silent because you're quieter. And I realized that that strategy was just not working, but I didn't know what else to do.
I'm curious with your own children that we were just talking about. It's a very different day and age, and I assume that they've experienced some level of exclusion, and whether that might be based on a marginalized identity or whatever it is at this point. I'm curious, what do you say to them versus what your parents told you?
Well, what's really interesting is I live now in the Bay Area in California, where my kids go to a high school where it's 40% Asian, 40% white, and 20%, everybody else. And so they live such a different life. My daughter, we were at an event, a couple events recently, and she said, "Oh, I experienced what you experienced growing up for the first time, where I felt like I didn't belong." She's 17 years old. In high school. She graduated from high school yesterday. And she's like, I never experienced this once in my entire life. Now I understand what you're talking about. And so I grew up with something that was so ingrained in every day. And she's like, now I get it. And I said, it took you 17 years to experience this. So in a lot of ways, it's a blessing
Yeah.
that she didn't have to go through that. But it's super interesting because when we explain what that felt like, because my husband grew up in North Carolina, he's also Chinese, it was just a part of who we were. And, being the forever foreigner was just like it was a part of just how you lived. And they said, we've never felt this before. It's just so interesting to see how demographics change over time. When we moved here, it was actually not that Asian. And over the years, as we raised our kids, it's become more and more so. And so you just see how the world changes. And they can't even imagine when I describe what it was like growing up. They're just like, it's like I grew up in a foreign country to them, even though it's another part of the US.
So this stay small, play it safe, protect yourself, put your head down. There's a part of this that heartbreakingly I'm understanding. I'm like, I understand the ways in which it would feel very scary as a child to be in that situation. And as you are growing in your career, at some point it turns from a way to stay safe to something that I'm assuming probably held you back, despite the incredible success that you had with your career. So I'm curious how that conditioning informed your career and ways in which it might have held you back, if any.
Well, I think it's one of those things where things work until they don't work, right? You outgrow the systems of coping that you have, and then they actually work against you. And so, the quote is, what gets you here won't get you to the next place. And I absolutely experienced that. So playing it small is great when you're in school and there's objective criteria and you take the test and you get the A and you go to college. And then I studied engineering. So you didn't have to participate. You could continue to play small and it was great. And then I get into consulting and I was like, I never got the highest rating. And objectively, I'm pretty good at what I do. And so I went to one of the partners and he's like, you're kind of bad at the client part of client service because, it's really about talking and engaging with the client. It's spending time with them. It's not the analysis. And I just realized that I was playing it small. And then I get to business school and it's class participation is 30 to 50% of your grade. And I thought, yeah, this is going to be difficult. And I had to really figure out, how do you change everything about yourself that's worked for you, that's protected you for so long? And that took me a long time to get to. But even when working in tech, there are very few women in the spaces that I was working in. And so again, you feel like that safety is in keeping your head down when actually having influence means speaking up.
Yeah.
And so it was that dynamic tension that I spent a long time with.
Was there anything that you can pinpoint that actually helped you let go of these things that had served you? You say it like it took a long time to condition yourself in a new way. How did you do that?
Well, I think part of it was I have a thing, which is everything is a skill to be learned. So I believe, so in America, there's this research that says in American schools, they believe that 30% of teachers think they're bad at math. And my parents told me, no, in Asian schools, you grow up, there's no such thing as bad at math. They're just not trying hard enough. And so I was like, that's really sad. So I researched all of it and they were right. Like in Asian schools, if you didn't understand math, it's because you didn't try hard enough and you need more help, not that you were naturally bad at it. And so I have this rule about everything, which is you can learn everything if you tried hard enough. You're not going to be the best at it. I have to say foreign language is not my thing. Music, since 7 years in piano lessons, and I can kind of play the piano, but it is a skill to be honed. And I realized that treating speaking up and treating having influence and actually being more extroverted was a skill that I had to learn. I had to figure it out because I wrote this article called The Secret Bias No One Talks About. And the secret bias is those who speak the fastest, speak the most, and show up are given disproportionate influence. Like how many times you've been an executive, you've been CEO. How many times does the person who speaks first and the loudest take up all the oxygen in the room?
Yeah.
And who's that going to be? It wasn't going to be me, certainly. And so often I think we have this desire to have influence, and yet we say, well, I'm an introvert, can't do that. Right? So you're playing against yourself. So instead, what I said was, I'm going to figure out if I treated this like a skill, like learning pickleball or playing piano or learning a foreign language, what is the skill that I need and how do I get there? And I broke it down like a problem to be solved. I'm an engineer by training. And so you just break it down as a problem, right? These are solvable problems. But it's funny nowadays, I get a lot of people say, well, I wish I could do what you do, but I'm an introvert. I'm like, actually, right?
I love this. One of the things I wrote in the book was about how I used to be so conflict avoidant that it erred on the side of dishonesty. I would withhold truth from people because I didn't want to hurt their feelings. And I always told myself, I just am not good at conflict. And I finally did the exact same thing where I was like, I'm going to teach myself healthy conflict and I'm going to practice with people I trust. I'm going to do it small. Like it doesn't have to be tomorrow. I am incredible at this. It is 2% better every day. Just keep at it, stacking these things onto each other. And so to hear this can be done from the lens of the introversion to someone who can own a room is something I think a lot of people need to hear. You talked in your TEDx talk about Money 2020, I believe was the conference, and the experience of being left out a bit. So can you help us understand that story? Because it's going to set up a lot of the questions that move forward.
So I was the head of payments at Facebook for many years. And I had, my career, I'd started at PayPal, so I've been in payments for many years as well. And so I would go to Money 2020, which is the preeminent payments conference, and I would go with my head of partnerships. And so, I was the head of product and engineering and basically the GM of the space. Usually the first day we'd walk the floor and talk to partners, kind of do the meet and greet. And I noticed something, which was they would, whoever would meet us would greet us and then slowly edge me out of the conversation. So it went from a 3-way conversation to a 2-way conversation. And I would be standing awkwardly on the side, kind of nodding my head. And it would be very awkward. And I just wouldn't say anything. But I usually keynoted on the second day. And suddenly, once I keynoted, everyone would come up to me. Suddenly, they wanted to talk to me because they felt like I had influence. But they had just assumed that I was the person who was just the assistant or, and I realized that I never wanted to make it awkward. I remember telling the story to a bunch of folks at a women in product dinner. And I said, I just don't want to make it awkward. And everyone's like, yeah. And then someone's like, no, we're going to make a pact right here. We're going to make it awkward because if they're going to underestimate us, they're always going to assume that we're the assistant or we're the more junior person. They will never change their priors. They will never break the stereotype if none of us ever say, actually, she's in charge. And one of the people who I was very close to, this happened to me all the time, which was, we were trying to acquire a company and the CEO was sitting on either side of the table. We were sitting on the either side of the table. He was sitting at the end and he literally spent 20 out of 30 minutes speaking to my colleague. And then finally 20 minutes in, he points to me and he goes, she decides whether or not we buy your company, right? And the CEO was so embarrassed. The thing is, he had looked us up beforehand. And so he knew who we were. It wasn't like it was a secret, but it's just a natural inclination. And again, I didn't want to make it awkward, right? That he made it awkward for us. And again, I don't think that person was malicious or even wrong because in his mind, he's like, in a room like this, there's 2 people. I'm going to speak to the one that naturally I have more rapport with, somebody who seems like they're the more natural leader. If he were playing the odds, he would be right. But I guess if we never make it awkward, if we never raise our hand and say, actually, then are we doing a disservice for everyone who comes after? Because the assumption is that we're not the leader, then nobody updates their priors.
Yeah. The person who's sitting in that room who says, actually, she's the one who makes the decision. There's an element here of self-advocacy for yourself, of yourself making it awkward. And there's also this, I don't know if it's a responsibility a hope that the other people in the room are going to advocate for you.
Mm.
But when you are often the quiet one, the person who is not owning the room, people can make assumptions that you don't need to be advocated for.
Mhm.
So was this something that you'd experienced with them before of them advocating on your behalf? And is there a way to help people in the office understand how to make it awkward for the people who are often marginalized?
Well, what's interesting is he's always been an incredible ally. So he's somebody I worked with and known for many years, and he was on my team, and we had a great rapport. And what was super interesting was he even noticed, because this happens a lot and people don't even notice.
Yeah.
Where at one point I was sitting in a room and there was the person who was presenting didn't come up to the table. So they were sitting in the back because there was no more seats. And myself and this other woman offered our seats up to him because we noticed. And every other person in the room, there was only two women in that room, right?
Of course.
Outside. We were like, so somebody points out, wait, why are the two women the two who offered their seats up to this person who's presenting? And it was just that nobody noticed. Again, they were busy, they were talking, but I think that a lot of women in particular are trained to be helpers, right? To look for opportunities to be helpful. Whereas others are just like living their life, and I totally get it, right? And I don't think anybody in that room did something wrong. But if you think about it, it's really that awareness that's missing often. And so how do we actually help people say, hey, when you see somebody who's being shuttled aside, who wasn't given the seat at the table, who wasn't invited to the meeting, raise your hand and actually help them. I think that that's something which is super important. There was a study about Supreme Court justices where the women justices were interrupted more and spoke less,
Of course.
right? They're at the top of the legal game in America. This is such an important 9 people, and yet they spoke way less. And so to change that dynamic, they actually changed the rules where they now ask questions in order of seniority. And now they looked at the time that they each spend, and they all speak much more equally. And so again, you think like it wasn't that the data wasn't there. It's just no one looked at it. And so somebody published a paper and said, this is what happened. And suddenly it's like the hidden is revealed. And you can change the system to make it more fair for everybody. And it wasn't that their lesser justices had less to say. It was just that the opportunity and the way that the dynamics worked. It also brought forward some other justices who are men who didn't speak as much either. And so you think about those 9 people who work together every day and are filmed. And, now you see that data. What is happening in the quiet rooms where nobody's filming and nobody's recording?
I mean, this is an element of owning your awkward, is the fact that you are actually helping highlight and help the people in the room be more aware of the dynamics that are at play. Whereas when you remain silent, they don't learn. If no one is ever showing them what is happening, they don't have the opportunity to understand what that might look like in a room. So I know that you have been practicing owning your awkward after the Women in Product. You have this incredible event. You're like, okay, we're going to own our awkward. What does it actually look like? What are we saying, especially as women? At least my experience has been, I am supposed to prioritize everyone else's comfort over my own, and making other people uncomfortable is something that I used to be incredibly uncomfortable with. And so as you're practicing that skill, what is it like? What are some of the stories where you're owning your awkward for the first time, and how did it feel?
Well, I think it is really being willing to make other people uncomfortable, something I was unwilling to do. Even people who would say really hostile and racist things to me. I didn't want to make anybody else uncomfortable. And like, I know how crazy that sounds, but it's like,
It doesn't. Like, I understand why, like, we're conditioned like this, but like,
yeah, so we're conditioned to be helpers, right? To play along, to be nice. And I think often, when you play nice, you're actually not speaking up and changing things. And so one of the things that I think is important is to actually, I like the name of your blog. You talk about behaving, right?
yeah,
Which is
unbehaved. Yeah.
unbehaved. It's like getting good trouble, right? Which is there are times when that awkwardness will force people to reevaluate all the assumptions they have. So how do you do that? The goal is not to make them uncomfortable. It's to make them see a side of something that they had never seen before.
Yeah.
And so if you treat it that way, so for example, I coach a lot of women, and one of the things I say is you need to write your self-evaluation first. You need to actually amplify the work that you're doing. And the first response I often get is, I'm really bad at self promotion, right?
Yeah, of course.
And the thing is, if you treat it as self promotion, you're not going to do it because you see it's a negative. What if I said, hey, actually sharing what you're doing is actually education. It's going to get your team more resources. It's going to get you more support. It's going to amplify the work that you do within the company so that you can actually get access to more resources to reach more customers. And suddenly you've changed the message. And so the same thing is true of this, which is, what if I said it's not for you and correcting the record that you're the CEO? When someone underestimates you, or that, that person who made you uncomfortable, who apologized to you later. But what if you were doing that and you told that story to help the next 20 women that that man works with?
Yeah.
So it's not for you. It's not self-advocacy. It's not self-promotion. It is paying it forward to the next generation of people who would otherwise be in the same situation.
I had this experience at a highly male dominated conference that I attended while I was writing the book. So I'm researching patriarchy and all the stuff that's going on. And I was finding that I was getting quite angry as I was writing. And I went to this conference, I'm going to say like 85% men, 400-ish people there. And I walked in like it was my singular mission to eradicate patriarchy with like cutting remarks. I was just in this like, I am angry. And so I was coming at it from a place of anger and also from a place of like wanting to shame the men. And I walked out of that conference feeling pretty crappy about myself. Like that didn't feel good to make them uncomfortable in that way. And what I understood later was that when you come from anger and shame and wanting to like be right, that for me, at least, it's not in alignment with my values.
Yeah.
It's not in alignment with my highest and best self. And what I'm hearing you talk about here is coming from this place of educating people, of benevolence, of wanting things to be better instead of being frustrated and angry and upset. When it comes from this place of betterment, then it, I assume, is more effective and feels a lot better and can make it more comfortable for yourself to lean into that. So I'm curious, you come all the way up to CEO of Ancestry and you have to really step into the limelight a bit more. How was that experience for you? What surprised you about sitting in the CEO chair?
I think the biggest thing is, first, a lot of being in the CEO chair is really channeling the organization culture. And that's super important to me. And that's something which naturally I really cared a lot about. And so alignment of values is super important to me. And Ancestry is one of those really high value, high culture companies. And I love that about it. I think the biggest challenge was, I shared this in the TEDx talk, which was, we're having a conversation literally with a partner at a consulting firm we're hiring to do a project. And when I introduced myself, they seemed visibly startled that I would be the CEO. And my colleague and CFO, he was so deeply offended on my behalf. And I realized that, you can reach a certain place. And it's not like, I'm sure he did the research before coming to this meeting because we're paying him like an unbelievable amount of money. And so I realized that it happens at all levels. Whether it's just, you're the woman in the room who's coming into a conference who you feel like you don't belong, or even in the C-suite, right? But let's normalize having women in the C-suite. If we normalize it more, I think that then it's a lot easier. I think for so long, we just didn't say anything. We would just, and that's why the whole making it awkward is really about forcing people to confront their biases, correct them, and then go forth so that the next generation of people they meet, the next 20, 50, 100 people they work with aren't going to face the same thing.
Yeah. So I believe the public reason for leaving Ancestry was a breast cancer diagnosis. And this was something that you wrote about, which I feel like the status quo, again, tells leaders that we need to not share everything with the public, that we need to be infallible, all of these things. And many people don't talk openly about things like having breast cancer. What was the decision for you when you were leaving to just be open and transparent with folks about what was going on?
Well, so I think there was a number of reasons, but I think that put me over the edge. Like, it was just a challenging time for me. My mom had just passed away. She was in hospice at my house, and I traveled for 24 weeks that year, and it was just a lot. And then I was diagnosed with breast cancer, and I had just lost my in-laws too. We were building a house that we could live together. There was a lot. There was a lot happening in my life. And I just realized that, like, I just couldn't, like, one more thing just couldn't I couldn't get it past that. And so once I basically, though, very openly share this because of the person who encouraged me to get a mammogram. So one of my friends, Mara Finley, she basically for her 50th birthday, I asked her what she wanted because I was going to miss her party. And she's like, I want you to get a mammogram. And I had never gotten a mammogram before. I was like 47, 48. And she's like, just get a mammogram. And I was like, okay, and she had had breast cancer at 48. And so I get a mammogram and it's clean. And then the next year I miss her party again. So again, traveling all the time. She's like, just get another mammogram. So I get another mammogram. I'm kind of late. And then immediately they're like, you're getting a biopsy today. And they move me into a room and then they literally, and I was like, excuse me? And I knew exactly what was happening at that moment. I was like, oh, okay. And so I called her and, we have this conversation and she's like, so I thanked her for helping me through this process. And she said, the only thing I ask of you, and I said, what can I do for you? She's like, tell everybody that you need to get screening. You need to be really open about it because you have a platform that lots of people like hear from you. If you share this, it will encourage other people to get screening. What was really fascinating was after I posted it and I wrote about it, I wrote an article called Drawing a Cancer Card. I posted on LinkedIn, 100,000 people liked it. But what was interesting was dozens and dozens and dozens of women reached out to me and said, I had been putting this off. I thought I was not at risk. Like people who had even did not schedule their biopsy after a suspicious mammogram reached out to me. And I was thinking, what are you doing? And I realized something, which is because, look, I think everyone has every right to be private. But at the same time, if we never share the story, then how do people know? Every woman in America has a 13% chance, lifetime chance of getting diagnosed with breast cancer. That is 1 in 8.
Yeah.
Right? And by the way, catching it a year or two early can make the difference between a very complicated outcome and a very good outcome. And so I happened to catch it super early, but it was very aggressive. And when they looked at it, they said your chances of recurrence is very high. And so, you need to be much more aggressive in the radiation, everything you're doing. And so the point is, again, if I had not listened to her, I would not be in the same situation. And I feel like that's something which I wish we were more open about because it does, again, it's like one of those things where paying it forward to those, few dozen women, out of the 50, 60, 70 women who reached out to me, 13% of them will be diagnosed at some point. And if you can just get them in a year or two earlier, it makes all the difference.
I love Mara. I'm literally after we get off scheduling my mammogram. As soon as we get off, I've already had my one, like I had it a year and a half ago, but I need to do it again. How was it to be contending and holding all these things and then also be making the decision around leaving as CEO? That is so much to handle.
Well, I left exactly at 4 years and I felt like I had such an incredible experience there. Wonderful company, great people, and I'm still in touch with a lot of them. And so I felt like, that the end of that journey and the start of the next journey happened. And it happened that, it coincided with some personal things that happened in my life. And, but it also gave me the mental freedom to actually take the cancer journey where you're not just like trying to fit everything in between because it was pretty challenging. And I'm on the other side of that. So it's been a year, over a year, it's a year and a few months. And I'm on the other side of that. And I'm very, very fortunate to have, a very supportive husband and the ability to get to the other side. But I don't know how people do it, but people have to do this every day where they're dealing with health insurance or they're dealing with, cancer, or they're dealing with treatment while they're working. And I think that one of the things I hope for is that we have better treatment options for women. I feel like our healthcare system fails a lot of people. I happen to have great health insurance, but if you don't, one of the things I hope for is that we have a world where people don't have to worry about their job when they're getting surgery and radiation and things like that.
Oh my gosh. I mean, you talking about this openly is essentially you owning your awkward on the largest platform and all of the things that you talked about disrupting the status quo and raising awareness that happened on this massive scale. So thank you for doing that. Thank you for continuing to talk about it. My experience with leaving my teeny tiny little company that I co-founded as CEO was that my sense of self-worth and my identity was very wrapped in the CEO title. Wow. And it sounds like you had a lot of other things going on. I'm curious about the identity question of you've left Ancestry. You're starting this new journey. What surprised you about not having the CEO title any longer?
Yeah. It's funny. After I left Ancestry, I had a party at my house for women in product, and a friend of mine who had left Google after 2 decades there, we wrote our names down on these name tags. As we were writing, she's like, what do we put under our name? Right. And then another woman who'd come in, she had just left her job too. She was on a health journey. And my friend says to her, hey, why don't you come over and join the blank name tag club? Because so often our identity is not just our name, but it's the company that we're associated with. It's our role, it's our title, it's all the accoutrements of modern society is tied up in this title or company or something else, right? It's your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah.
And, this is actually what prompted me to start writing my next book, which is about transitions. And the reason I did that was because it's almost, I call it the unmooring. It's kind of like you feel like you're untethered.
Yep.
And somebody was describing this where she just left her company she had founded, she had sold it. And she's like, I just feel like I'm in the gray. Like, I don't know what to do with myself. And when she described that, I was like, that's exactly the moment when you should do the journey of self-discovery of who you really are. Because she had been tied to this company for so many years. She'd been there for almost a decade. And she's like, who am I without that? Right? Without being the founder of this company. But at the same time, like, she's an incredible person who has interest and, value that's beyond tying to this one company or whatever she's doing. Right. And so I think we have so much of our self-identity tied to whatever those things are. What is that? What if that goes away?
Yeah.
And if we can't sit with that, if we can't be that person who's like just sitting in the silence, then maybe we're doing the wrong things. And so part of this book on transformation is really about ending one chapter and starting the next one. And not just flipping the page and just going to the next thing. Because
Yep.
I was one of those people, I graduated from school. I started like a week after my first job. Like I did all the things between jobs. I would take the weekend off, right? And I just kept going and going and going. And I realized something, which is I never let myself sit in the silence.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where you find who you really are in that uncomfortable space. And so one of the things I encourage people, and I have this worksheet, which I'm happy to share with your audience.
Yes, please.
Actually take the moment and hit reset. Reflect on, and by the way, for people who are laid off, it's even harder, right? Because it's not even your choice. You chose to leave your role, but when you're laid off, it's like you're cut off from all of your friends at work, all the communication. You're suddenly, and I talk to a lot of people who've been laid off, and they're just like, it's like getting your arm chopped off. Like what do you do with yourself the day after a layoff? You literally are doing a thing and then it's silence.
Yep.
And so I created this process and I've given it to a lot of people, which is hit the reset button and then give yourself time to reflect before you rush into the next thing. And then reimagine, like, what did you like and what did you not like? I think too often, I was just talking to a friend yesterday. She'd been laid off after many years at a big tech company. And she's like, I'm starting to interview. I'm like, it's literally been 4 days. Like, do you really need another job? And I said, if you have the space, give yourself a little bit of grace and come and let yourself get to the other side.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I've talked to a lot of people about this. I just talked to Deepa Purushothaman. She's an incredible author both of us, it took nearly 2 years to wade through this transitory period. And my therapist always called it, she had this word called interstice. And she was like, you have to wade through it to get to the other side. There is no fast forward. Yeah. But once you get to the other side, that's the place that you want to be. And I was like, I hate it. I hate the gray. I hate the untethered. I've never been untethered because I'm a high achiever. I've always had my goals. I always have my external motivation and the things that help me understand why I am worthy and how to orient myself. And without it, I was completely lost. But it's one of the best times of my entire life in terms of what it has produced today. And speaking of things that have been produced in your transition, you have this column with your daughter.
Yes.
All about Asian Americans and high achievement and behaving, which of course, unbehaving is like my thing. Can you help us understand this? Where did this come from? And what are some of the key learnings that we have so far?
Well, so she started that column actually with her grandmother, and she had actually interviewed her grandmother for an essay contest, and then she said, I want to turn this into a column. So she pitched it to her grandmother, and her is my mother-in-law, and her grandmother was like very excited to do this, and they started writing their first column. And she passed away suddenly. And so she was like, do I give this up? What do I want to do? And we said, she's like, maybe I can get you or dad to write with us. And I thought she would pick her dad because but she was like, no, I want you to do this with me, mom. And I said, okay,
Aw.
if you want to. And I said, well, what do you want it to be? And so she had to shape the column. She worked with the editor, and, we call it a tiger mom and her cub. And it's really about intergenerational. It's like immigrant families have a very different dynamic, and Asian American families have a very different dynamic. And so we talk about like our views on dating. And I said, I have the same rule that my parents had for me. You cannot date anyone until your sophomore year in college. And she felt differ. So she wrote a column about how she's like, actually high school relationships teach you something. And I'm like, I don't want you to date until your second year in college. And so we often talk about difficult things. And in fact, I think it's a form of like therapy for us, because she'll often say things in the column that I had no idea she was thinking. Like we'll talk about it. So we walk the dog together every night, and we'll talk about the column, and then she'll write something and I will be completely surprised. And by the way, a lot of kids and parents read this together and they tell us, I wish my kids would be very open. I said, I wish my kids would be too. But I think because she has to submit the column, she's way more open about sharing some of the challenges that she faces, And for example, my kids refuse to move from our old house to our new house. And by the way, they're adjacent. Okay. They're literally back to back. And they literally refuse to pack. They refused to even go to the new house to look at it when we were building it. We asked them to pick colors for the room. They refused. They just absolutely, it was like a filibuster in our house. And we could not figure out what was wrong. So my son played along, and he ended up going off to college before we moved in. But my girls just refused to move. And so he was at college. He's like, just move my stuff. I'll show up on the other side. And finally, I wrote a column, and I said, this month we're going to talk about moving. And what I ended up doing was I basically packed up all the furniture and just 3 loads of laundry, and I just moved. I just had movers move, and I left everything else in our old house. And then I said, why don't you come back and get the stuff you want? And then finally I asked them, why don't you want to move? And they said, because this is where we lived with our grandma, their other grandmother, and this is where she passed. And we're afraid that we're going to lose all our memories of her. But they would never tell me, because my husband and I were like, why are they not? Why are they fighting us? And they said they were worried because they had spent their whole childhood in this one house. We lived there for 9 years. And they said, this is where we made all our memories with our family. And so she wrote about it. And that was the first time she had actually shared what she really thought. And I asked my other daughter, who's the younger one, and she's like, oh, yeah, absolutely. And she would literally go back with our dog to just sit on the old couch, because we were going to get rid of our old couch. So that was the only thing left in that house. And she would just go sit on that couch to remember. And it was so interesting because I think kids are much deeper and insightful than you think, but often they don't share it with you.
Yeah. Oh, that's so beautiful. I mentioned I have a 4-year-old daughter, and I'm imagining in 10, 15 years us doing this together. That's such a beautiful project. So now we have this. You have the Substack. You've got all these other things going on, but what feels most important to you right now?
Well, so, you reach a different point in your life where there's the striving point of your life, right? You're climbing the corporate ladder. It's when's the next promotion? Once you reach a certain place, you're like, okay, when does the climbing stop? When do you actually enjoy the plateau and just look around? And I feel like I've reached that place where I'm much more comfortable with myself than I've ever been before. And it's actually a great place to be, but it took me a long time to get here. And I think it's like you spent 2 years trying to process your previous journey of 15 years, right?
Yeah.
And that is an interesting journey to go on. And I feel like I was able to do that. I took time off for the first time. There was no appointments, no meetings, no obligations. And instead, I just like enjoyed the time. And I learned AI during that time. I ended up founding a company. But it was just, if I felt like I never gave myself space to actually explore the things, because I was always chasing the next thing, the next meeting, the next project, the next, next. And so I do think that for us and for everybody who's a high achiever and spent their lives kind of just like hitting every goal, it's actually great to not have to strive for something for a period of time so that you know what you really, really value.
we're going to get to the final question, which is the permission slip. If you were to give listeners a permission slip, and I think we already have the permission slip to own our awkward. So a different permission slip to unbehave or unlearn or let go of a story that they're holding, what would that be?
I love the last thing you said, which is retelling your story. I think often we tell, I wrote about this recently where I talked to 3 people who were recently laid off for very, very different reasons. And all very justifiable reasons, and it had nothing to do with them. It was just things that happened in the company, changes and things like that. And each of them told a story that made it seem like they thought they deserved to be laid off. And I pointed out to them, I was like, why do you think that? And, they're like, well, if I had just known X, if I had tried harder with Y, and I said, or this was a corporate restructuring. One of them was just a corporate restructuring. Like they eliminated the job. One was like a new CEO came in and they basically brought in their own team. So it was out of their control. And I said, when I tell people my dad died of cancer, they're like, what kind? And I say lung cancer. And then they say, oh, did he smoke? And it's because in our heads, if he smoked, then we're not at risk of that because we have control over not smoking. And I'm like, no, he actually did not smoke. And both of his brothers also died of lung cancer and they didn't smoke either. Okay. It's a longstanding thing in Asian American communities where the non-smokers actually have a much higher rate than the average population in the US. Anyways, but the point is our minds look for justification and patterns. And I said, but what if it was outside of your control? What I worry about is you're fighting the last war. It's like, if I had just tried harder, and you're beating yourself up over something that was outside of your hands. And then you're actually going to the next conversation with that in the back of your head. Instead, what if you opened up the opportunity and thought, hey, this happened. I'm going to unpack it and then I'm going to put it away and I'm going to seek the next thing. And so I give you the permission to actually rewrite the story. Because often the stories we tell ourselves are the wrong version. And then that affects our behavior in a negative way.
Yeah. Love it. All right. When can we get the book, the next book? And how do people find you in the meantime?
Okay, well, first, I'm happy to send your audience my framework because I love hearing feedback.
Yay.
I've been testing it with dozens of people. And the framework is just a way for you to process. So it's a questionnaire. It's like a couple pages. And you just need to take the time and as you go through transitions. I'm working on the book now. Hopefully it'll come out in the next year or two.
Yay.
But actually, you see so many people in the process of transitions and it's hard. Right. And I think right now when everyone feels so unsettled by AI, when people feel like their jobs are on the line, when they feel like everything is fraught, this is a time when we need more solid ground. And so I use this process to help people find their solid ground. And if you want to find me, I'm on Substack. So I have a newsletter just like you do on Substack called Perspectives, and it's deblu.substack. I'm also on LinkedIn. And I'm happy if anybody wants to reach out, I'm happy to chat with you as well.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Happy Friday. And thank you for doing this after being awake at 2:00 in the morning to wait for your darling daughter after the graduation party. I appreciate it and just appreciate you very, very much.
And thanks for the invitation. It's great seeing you again.
Yay. The wonderful Deb Liu. It was a banger, right? It was real good. Before we go, I have 4 awesome takeaways that really stuck with me or my unbehaved lessons of the day. Number 1, making it awkward is an act of service. Deb's reframe about what correcting the record and making it awkward does was incredibly powerful for me. When women or any underestimated person resists correcting the record, it's often because we're worried about making other people uncomfortable or being viewed as difficult, or simply because conflict like this in a professional setting is really friggin' hard and uncomfortable. But when Deb said, it's not for you, it's paying it forward to the next generation of people who would otherwise be in the same situation, it completely blew my mind and made me think about this in an entirely different way. When we speak our truth from a place that's aligned with our values and is genuinely coming from a place of wanting to help someone learn or see a blind spot, we're helping ourselves, we're helping the other person in the scenario, and we're helping the people that are going to walk into that same room in the future. Number 2, everything is a skill that can be learned. When Deb talked about how she taught herself to own a room and be more extroverted instead of telling herself, I'm just an introvert, so I can't do it. Again, totally blew my mind. Like, anyone can do this, right? Deb talked about how she literally broke the skill down like an engineering problem and then just practiced getting better at it. The takeaway being, you're not stuck with the personality you were handed. Speaking up is a skill. Setting boundaries is a skill. Having hard conversation, skill. And every skill is learnable. Number 3, slowing down and sitting in silence is where the good stuff happens. Deb's story about the blank name tag club stuck out for me, specifically how much we tie our sense of identity and self-worth to our title. We're so conditioned to be on the hamster wheel that even in the moments of transition, we feel entirely panicked if we have to step off the hamster wheel, even just for the littlest bit. But Deb spoke about how that pause, that silence before you sprint to the next thing is what's truly needed. So if you've just closed a chapter, a job, a role, a season of your life, resist the pull to open the next one immediately. The unmooring, it does feel uncomfortable and even awful at times, but it's also where the next version of you gets introduced if you take the time to explore. Oh, and heads up, Deb and I both published companion Substack pieces this week on this very topic, the Blank Name Tag Club. Go check them out. Links in the show notes. And finally, key takeaway number 4, rewrite the story before it rewrites you. Deb's permission slip about the stories we tell ourselves about why things happened, the layoff, the diagnosis, the ending, and how often those stories are wrong felt really important. Especially the fact that when we aren't aware of those stories and we blame ourselves, they shape our behavior in the future in a negative way. So before you carry a flawed story into your next chapter, ask yourself, is this actually true? Or is it just the thing I told myself so I could feel some version of control? The stories that we tell ourselves matter way more than we think. And so often we don't realize that we're the one holding the pen. That's it for today. If Deb's story resonated with you, do 2 things this week, right? 1, go read the Substack pieces that she and I published about the Blank Name Tag Club. They're both fabulous. 2, if you have a mammogram you've been putting off, take Mara Finley's advice and Deb's and schedule it. I already did mine between recording this and putting it out, and I'm all clear. And the whole time I thought about Deb and Mara and how grateful I was that they gave me this advice. Thanks so much for spending time with me today. If today's episode meant something to you, share it with someone who needs it. Leave me a rating, send me a nice word, whatever you want to do. See you next time. Bye-bye.